Hi everyone, and welcome to a new edition of You Are My Boro with myself, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. Going to be a little bit different this week. We put a shout out on our various social media platforms this morning for some questions for you to throw for you to suggest that we throw around with each other. You've not disappointed. Thanks very, very much. We've got shed loads. We will try to get through as many as we can. We'll keep on kind of doing this sporadically through the summer. Good chance for us to get an idea of what you're interested in, and hopefully we can add at least a tiny bit of insight into some of them. A little bit before we start, if you're watching on YouTube, then please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. If you're listening on the various podcast platforms that we're available on, then rate and review. We'll get straight into the questions. Just before we do, I wanted to talk to you about one thing, Dom. You've done a really good piece this morning, which is up there on the Northern Echo website. If you haven't already seen it, get along. Subscribe to the Echo website when you're there if you can. That's always good for us. You've spoken to Josh Coburn, who's obviously left Boro now on a permanent basis, gone to Millwall. Thought there was some really nice stuff in there from Josh about his love for Boro basically coming through. Clearly that goal against Spurs. I mean, how did you find him, Dom? And I think it feels like the right time for everyone for this move to happen. But it is a bit of a shame that he's not really going to have potentially have lived up to what he could be at Boro.
Yeah, agree with all that. He was great. I mean, he is. You'll have interviewed him after games,
Yeah.
and he is great, isn't he? Just genuine, kind of hasn't changed at all from when we first interviewed him. Hayden Hackney's the same, isn't he? When you speak to Hayden Hackney, just exactly the same as he was when we first spoke to him, you know, 2-3 however many years ago it was. But yeah, Coburn was great, and he kind of said what you said there, really. He loves Boro. He's loved his time at the club. He'll look back with incredible fondness and pride at what he achieved at the club, because this isn't a story of someone who's come through the ranks as an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and stayed on. I think he joined Boro when he was 16. When Neil Warnock put him in the first team, it was very much an unknown quantity, really, wasn't he? I think we've talked about this before. Like, often with academy players, there's a buzz for years, isn't there, before they get into the team. Well, Coburn absolutely wasn't like that. I'm sure he'd say that himself. Warnock saw something, put him in. Coburn said he still hears from Warnock every now and again. He gets a text when he scored.
Probably wanting free sausages.
Yeah. When he's up here on his bike rides.
Yeah.
But he said that he felt like it was the right time. I think he got a taste last season of being the main man, really, or certainly one of the main men. And he sat down with Kieran Scott at the end of last season, and Coburn said that pretty much his mind was made up. He knew that it was time to make a jump, to go out of his comfort zone, and he'd put it. Alex Neil made him feel $1 million. I think you spoke to Neil, didn't you, at the end of last season?
Yeah, down at the Den, yeah.
He made it pretty clear that he was desperate to sign him. I think it's win-win-win for everyone concerned. Coburn goes, and he's going to be the main man for a club that will be aiming for the top 6 this season. Millwall get one of the top targets. Boro get more than £5 million potentially down the line for an academy product. And from Boro's perspective, I think I just said at the start of the January window that Boro are going to get more than 10 million for Isaiah Jones and Josh Coburn. As much as it's always a shame to see those players go, that is good business as well. Yeah. No denying that. That is good business.
And I'm absolutely sure. Well, in fact, I am absolutely sure. I know, because I've seen the questions in advance. But there's going to be questions on transfers that we get stuck into in a minute. But just off the back of the Coburn thing, I mean, the fact that Boro have allowed Coburn to leave surely just strengthens the idea, which I think we've known all along, to be fair, that a new forward has to be coming in this summer.
Yeah, a striker's going to sign this summer, isn't it? There's no doubt about that. And kind of Coburn alluded to that when he said that Kieran Scott had said to him, you know, we'd like you to stay, but there's going to be fierce competition for places. Well, at the minute, there's only Tommy Conway, isn't there? But a striker will join this summer, and suddenly Coburn would then potentially have been starting the season as third choice striker. And it was interesting that Coburn said, really, regardless of the managerial situation, didn't matter. This was done really effectively before Rob Edwards came in, and Coburn had made it clear he wants to move. But let's talk transfers then, because we've had loads and loads and loads on transfers, and one of them From Barry Selner on X, how come we weren't in for Emile Reese given previous? Reese has signed for Bristol City today from Preston. Obviously, Borough have been linked with him in the past. I don't know what you think, Scott, but I think it's pretty clear, really, that Borough will have had their targets since January, strikers' targets since January. They couldn't do a permanent deal in January, but those targets won't have all stayed the same. But those players who were in Borough's thinking in January will still very much be in the thinking now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've talked about the fact that when Latterlath left, you know, there were options where Borough could have moved to for a permanent deal. The decision was taken that the time wasn't right to do that. It was going to be too expensive, almost certainly. It was a fairly limited pool of players that were going to be available. And hence we went down the route of Iheanacho online and online on loan and deals that didn't really work out. But yeah, I think, you know, there are long-standing attacking targets. It'd be interesting to see whether Strelec re-emerges as a genuine target. He was very, very much in Borough's thinking in each of the last two windows, to be fair. But there will be plenty of others, and that will move and adapt. Now, on Reese, you know, yes, Borough were interested there in the past, but I think that's when they were looking for a certain type of striker at that time, and you know, for all that he's undoubtedly got strengths, Reese is a certain type of striker, isn't he? Now, you can argue that he's similar to some of the strikers that Edwards has had joy with at Luton. Yeah, okay. But I just think, you know, that's a target that Borough have moved on from.
This one, that kind of ties in really, and various fans asked this, or a variation of this, but this is from Liam. Why does it seem like there is no movement on transfers? No doubt it's busy behind the scenes, but it does seem like we're moving very slow this window with nothing imminent. What I'd say about that is, just because it's not public doesn't mean it's not happening, and just because we don't know the names, and just because they haven't come out and emerged yet, doesn't mean that deals aren't close. Borough have done a good job, as frustrating as it can be for us. Borough have done a good job, haven't they, over recent windows of keeping names under wraps. And Ben Doak, Tommy Conway, Aidan Morris, all last summer, it didn't really emerge until it was just about done, or until the deal was just about there. From the club's perspective, you'd much prefer that. The names getting out, alerting other clubs of potential availability. Micah Hamilton was another one last year where, I know it hasn't worked out for him last year, but that was very much seen as a coup last summer. And Borough's feeling was, had it got out that he was available on a permanent transfer, loads of other clubs that are scurried to get involved. But Borough will be, I'm sure of it, well down the line with several deals. That's not to say that I know anything is imminent, but we know from a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I think we first reported that first targets had been identified. They were very much part of the discussions with Rob Edwards, weren't they, when he was in talks to take over at Borough. And it won't be a case of nothing happening. Borough will be moving and doing all they can and pressing on behind the scenes. And it wouldn't surprise me if a name emerged, be it this week, next week, and things very quickly move on from there, because the name emerges when it's just about done.
The other thing I'd say off the back of that is Edwards has only been in position for just over a week, hasn't he? And while work has been going on all summer, and feelers were being put out, there was discussions taking place with clubs. I think perfectly understandably, Borough didn't want to sign off on any significant deal before the head coach was in place and had an opportunity to put his views across, give his own assessment of the squad, and for Kieran Scott and the rest of the recruitment team to actually bear down with Edwards on what type of players he wants, what he wants his side to look like, how he wants them to play. So, you know, while a lot of the groundwork had been done, actually getting anywhere near to properly pushing the button, if you like, was never going to happen before Edwards was in. Now, he's only been in a week. I have no doubt that in certain areas, things will have stepped up in this last week. You know, we hear little bits of suggestions that the deals are getting that bit closer. So I'm with you. I fully expect that by the time Borough properly start pre-season, I know players are back, I know the testing's happened, but once we get into the meat of pre-season, which is really in another couple of weeks' time, by the time they're going away on the trip, by the time matches are starting to come around, I'm sure there'll be new faces through the door, and then that will continue through the summer. Because I think, as we said, going into the summer, you're looking at a summer here where Borough potentially needs 6, 7 or 8 signings, really. So, there is going to have to be progress fairly soon. But I'm with you. I'd be confident that there will be.
And I think kind of frustration or panic or whatever you want to call it might well have been triggered by a couple of things that's happened in the last couple of days. Kane Kessler-Hayden signing for Coventry from Aston Villa.
Yeah.
Well, he was linked with Borough and he was discussed by Borough at the end of last season, but he was by no means Borough's leading target at right back, right wing back, which we'll get on to whether it's going to be a right back or a right wing back. And from Borough's perspective, it's not a case of them having missed out on a player. They weren't involved. They were discussed, but there was no bids tabled. There was no talks. It didn't get any further than a player being discussed at the end of last season. But he will have been one of countless who was discussed at the end of last season. And the other thing is the Alfie Doughty situation at Luton, who is a player who obviously Rob Edwards knows well from his time in charge of Luton. From what we gather, Borough will kind of keep tabs on his situation there, but there's got priorities they want to box off elsewhere, which we'll get to: right back, centre half, centre midfield, up front. And then once they've ticked those boxes, they'll potentially go back and look at the left back, left wing back situation. But again, from what we gather, Luton aren't going to do a deal for cheap on Doughty. He only signed a new long-term contract last summer. All the noises are that it wouldn't be an easy deal to do. So from Borough's perspective, it makes complete sense to box off your priorities first. And there are glaring priorities elsewhere, aren't there, before you get into that. Ticket prices, season ticket prices. We've had various comments on this because Borough put their season tickets back on sale today. We're recording on Tuesday morning, and the season tickets went back on sale after the early bird period earlier in the year. The new prices, which range between 620 or which start at £620 for adults, has caused a bit of disgruntlement, it's fair to say, among the fan base. What's your take on it, Scott? And it's one of those, isn't it, where you've always got to assess both sides and strike the balance.
I think that's a lot of money. There's absolutely no getting away from the fact that is a lot of money to watch. Being realistic about it, to watch Championship football at a time when we know the wider economic picture in the country in general. We know the specific economic picture in big parts of the Northeast. It's not for us to sit here and blithely dismiss the fact that is a lot of money to pay to go and watch your football team. If you're a couple with kids, but even if you're just a couple, well over 1,200 quid to commit to watching the football over the course of a season. And obviously that's before any extras are on top of that. That's a lot of money. There's no getting away from it. And, it's at the higher end of what Championship clubs are charging. And it's undoubtedly an increase in what Borough have been charging in the past. The flip side, and I don't think you can ignore this, is that the latest set of accounts highlighted quite vividly the amount of money that Borough lose week in, week out, every season, and that as owner, Steve Gibson has to cover. This is not a football club that pays for itself. So I understand that the club feels like it needs to maximise every possible revenue stream. And unlike at the top end of the Premier League, where you can make the argument that, money through the gate is no longer what it once was, that doesn't apply at Championship level anymore. The key determinant of Borough's financial health and well-being is still the amount of money that's generated at the Riverside when matches are on. So I understand that Borough feel like they need to maximise that. Borough's argument is and will be that there was an early bird window. Fans did have the opportunity to purchase tickets for less than that price. Plenty of fans will have taken advantage of that. I think you've got some early figures, haven't you, in a sec, to kind of tie into that. So, there was a window there. Fans had the opportunity to get straight in. Now they go on general sale. It is a hike. It feels expensive. I don't think you can get away from that. But this is a club that for a long time now has been losing money. So how do you square that circle?
Yeah, that's it. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we're in the incredibly fortunate position where clearly we don't have to fork out like this and that. You know, that's never lost on us, and it is an incredible amount of money. But then, from Borough's perspective, they have to deal with the rising costs as well. You touched there on the early bird period earlier this year. Well, in the early bird period, there was a freeze on prices across the stadium. And there was also the under 11 price, the fixed under 11 price across the stadium, which I think was £125, which was new this year. Borough made every effort to kind of listen to fans, to speak to fans after a bit of disgruntlement 12 months previous. And Jim asked the question here, is there any season ticket sales numbers? Well, from what we gather, the sales so far are at over 17,000, which is around very much what it was this time 12 months ago. So that there has been a take-up, a really impressive take-up. I mean, that when you consider where Borough were at really at the end of last season and the general kind of feeling of apathy, which we've talked about again and again at the end of last term, the fact that Borough had underperformed, underwhelmed, the uncertainty really going into the summer over the managerial situation, to be north of 17,000 already is a staggering effort from the supporters. And yeah, it's one of those where I think from our perspective, you understand it's not sitting on the fence, but you completely understand both sides of the argument.
Yeah, and you know the strength of that established season ticket support, if you like, is massively important to the football club. You know, in terms of their budgetary planning and everything, they need to know pretty certainly what season ticket money they're getting in like that. So hence why there is an attempt, I think, from within the club to make the early bird deal appealing, because ideally they want as many in that, because that they know right from the start of the summer then that's sorted, that's committed, that's money in the bank, if you like. So there's got to be an appeal to that scheme, if you like. It probably does feel like the leak's been quite big this time around, but I guess the proof of that pudding will be in the eating. And as ever, I always think kind of match by match sales and later season ticket sales. An awful lot of that comes down to how the team's doing, isn't it? Is there a bit of momentum? Is there a bit of excitement? Is the Riverside a place where people want to be because it really feels like something's happening? Well, we won't know that for another few weeks or months, will we?
There's various here on. Now let me get them. Let me get them up here because there's a few of all the same ones. Where are we? So Graham Bandera, what system do you think Edwards will employ? Paul Marwood, is a wing-back formation the plan we're now building towards? Most likely a 3-4-3, given we have good options on the wing like Azaz and Whitaker, and I'm pretty sure there's one more yet from Matt. We know Edwards wants to both try and play his way, but also utilise the players we have here. Since we have a lot of wide players, paired that with our priorities this window, sorry, that's cut off. But the question is basically, does it look nailed on that it'll be wing backs, that it'll be 3-4-3? It's an interesting one, this, isn't it? Because you spoke to Rob Edwards last week, and the indication was very much, I'll work out, if he hasn't already, how to get the best, or how he feels to get the best out of the players and options at his disposal. Clearly, the squad's going to be strengthened, but I don't think it's nailed on. I don't think it's necessarily nailed on either way. Do you? On what form?
No, I don't. So we asked him quite a number of questions on kind of around that theme. Do you have a set style? Is what you did at Luton an obvious template for what you're going to try and do at Borough? How do you look at the current squad? And within all of that, I think his overriding message was, I'm not one of these managers that's absolutely wedded to a certain style of play. I'm not Russell Martin going into the Premier League with Southampton last year. I'm not, Ange at Spurs, where it's my way or the highway. This is what I do. He was like, no, I'm not like that. If you look at my Luton team, the Luton team that got promoted played completely differently to how my Forest Green team played. And then it started playing very differently in the Premier League once we got a handle on what was needed there. And he was basically saying, I'll come in, I'll have a good look at the squad, I'll look at the type of players that we're going to be trying to sign. Then I'll work out what best suits them, rather than coming in with a system first and fitting players into it. Now, I think it's an interesting one because a lot of those comments there were, this is a squad that's tailor-made to play 3-4-3, 4-5-1. 3-4-3, 5-3-2, whatever, with wing-backs. I kind of see that to a degree, in that there are a lot of wide players in this Boro squad. There are players who could probably do the wing-back role, but you haven't really got what I would term as out-and-out kind of obvious wing-backs. You definitely haven't on the right-hand side. Now, you can go and sign one. Maybe Bangura, maybe Borges, but they don't absolutely scream to me wing-backs. And then when you're talking about wide players, so say a Bergzorg or a Whittaker, if you're playing 3-4-3, your wide players are wing-backs, really. I don't see Whittaker or Bergzorg as wing-backs. I mean, they don't defend. I just don't see them as 3-4-3 players. So actually, the more I dig into this squad and look at it, the more I think if they are going to play with out-and-out wing-backs, that's going to have to dictate a lot of what they do transfer-wise, because I'm not sure there are the players to play that. 3 centre-halves, wide centre-halves, yeah, absolutely. I can see that works. Top end of the pitch, yeah, fine. But your actual wide players, I think, cause you a problem, because I don't think you've got natural wing-backs, but I think you've got a lot of wide players who, if you are playing with wing-backs, you're probably going to struggle to get in the team. So I think that's a really interesting one. And again, without wanting to sit on the fence, we probably won't get a proper idea until pre-season. And even then, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he chopped and changed and played with 3 at the back some game days, 4 at the back others, and trialed various systems. So we might actually not properly know until the first game of the season.
I don't know whether you'd seen it, but Edwards did a Q&A on the club site with fans over the weekend, where fans had asked questions, and he obviously answered them. And within that, he was asked about his formation, and he said, I think it's a fluid thing. Whether it's Forest Green, Luton, or here now, I've always appreciated that it's different groups of players who suit different ways of playing. What we want to try and do is get the best out of the players. That means asking them to do what they're good at while also pushing and developing them. We also want to ask them to do what they're comfortable at doing. Well, like you say there, playing Delano Bergzorg as a left wing back isn't asking him to do what he's comfortable doing. I agree with you. And I think what I would say, clearly the games will be the biggest indicator, but I also think transfers will be. When, for example, Boro sign a right back or a right wing back, depending on which one it is, if it's a right back, a pretty obvious right back rather than a wing back, then that gives us a pretty clear indicator, doesn't it? That it's going to be a back 4. I agree, though, on the players you've got. I mean, you mentioned Borges there. If you're playing a back 3 with wing backs, I think Borges would be better fit as the left-sided centre-half than the left wing back. You've got Bangura, but there's obvious question marks over Bangura. He's barely played and didn't kick a ball last year. There's no obvious right wing back. We haven't seen Josh Dady, so we can't judge there. But Luke Ayling's not a natural fit as a right wing back. So I agree with you. It feels like if it's going to be wing backs, there's more work to be done, doesn't it? And then what do you do with Whittaker? What do you do with
that's it. Yeah, exactly. And
you play them narrow off a striker. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. That was my kind of, my instant reaction when he came in was, well, that will probably mean wing backs. The more I've looked at it, the more I've thought about it, the more I listened to him in his first press stuff at Rockcliffe. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure.
A few more. Again, there's a couple of among the same variation here. From RM, what's a realistic league position for Edwards this year? And then from Red Army, what's the target this season? Hayden and Rav situation in the first week back. So let's get on this target first. What the realistic league position is. You spoke to Edwards last week.
Yeah.
What was the feel on that?
So the feel on that was, I'm here for 3 years. Promotion is the target within that period. Ideally, we'd like it to be next year, but the most important thing next year is to improve on this year. That seemed to be the general kind of tenet of the message. I'm here to get this club promoted. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be next year, as long as there's improvement, there's progress, and it's a building block to the following year. I kind of see that. I agree with that. But Boro finished 10th last year and yet had every chance of making the playoffs on the last game of the season. They were, as I think we've, pretty much said on regular videos, pretty bang average for big parts of last season. And yet were very, very nearly in the playoffs. So I think if you're, I've said this again in the past, I think if you're the manager of Middlesbrough in the Championship, the minimum starting point at any season has to be a place in the playoffs. I think it does. I think you've got to be aiming to finish top 6. And if you don't finish in the top 6, then on at least some level, it's a failure. And I think, as Borough did under Michael Carrick, the club then have every right to forensically dig into it and find out why it failed. Now, there might be, we don't know what's going to happen yet this summer. We don't know who's going to leave. We don't know who's going to sign. Come the end of the season, narrowly missing out on the playoffs might not actually be that dramatic a failure. There might be plenty of reasons. It felt like in Carrick's second season, there were enough mitigating factors for missing out on the playoffs not to be written off as just a simple failure. But I don't think you can be Borough's head coach and bridle at the fact that at the start of the season, people are going to expect you to finish in the playoffs as a minimum requirement. I think that's fair.
And the Hayden and Rav situation. So I think they do come as a pair, because I know Zaz has been linked with a move away as well, but this summer and Premier League interest. But when you think of the players who, even at the start of the summer, were likely to be in demand this summer, there's going to be interest in, they're the first two players who immediately spring to mind. And Hackney's certainly the first one. And only this week, the pair of them have been linked with Crystal Palace. We ran the story last week that Crystal Palace were keen on Rav van den Berg. Indications are that he's not the top target, but there's all sorts going on with Palace at the back anyway, isn't it? Because of Mark Gay's ongoing uncertainty. Palace want to sign a centre-half regardless of that. Hackney, it's absolutely no surprise that he's of interest to Premier League clubs. Porto were interested in January. He's been one of the standout midfielders in the Championship for a couple of years. He's captain Borough. He was at the under-21s. I know he didn't start, which I think can be, or start and feature prominently for Lee Carsley's side, which I think potentially a good thing and a bad thing for Borough, really, depending which way you look at it. Had he played regularly, had he played every game, then he would have no doubt caught the eye of more, and there would have been more interest, and it might have accelerated any movement this summer. But it would have also probably increased his valuation, his price tag, wouldn't it? And that's the interesting part, I think. And I've seen it knocked back and forth on socials all this week. What are the worth? What are the worth? What's a good deal for Hayden Hackney? What's a good deal for Rav van den Berg this summer?
So I take your point on Hackney there, but all I would say is gone are the days when Hayden Hackney's a bit of a hidden secret. Clubs all over Europe, all about Hayden Hackney. And I expect there to be really strong interest in Hayden Hackney this summer. And I suspect, while, Palace is knocking about at the minute and there will be Premier League interest, I'm sure, I strongly think that Hackney might get some very attractive Job Bellingham-style offers from big clubs in the Bundesliga, potentially big clubs in Serie A, potentially big clubs in Spain. I think from what I'm hearing, probably more likely Germany and Italy. I think it becomes really difficult for Borough to keep hold of him then. It feels like with Hayden Hackney that for the last 2 or 3 windows, while, I'm not suggesting here there's any kind of a gentleman's agreement or anything like that, but it feels like Borough have held on to Hackney when there's probably been enough bubbling around interest that they could have sold him if they'd wanted to. And Hackney could have pushed for a move much, much more strongly than he clearly has. Now, that's not to say that Hackney's going to be banging the doors down this summer. I don't think he is, because he's Borough through and through. He loves it here. He's settled, all of that. But, if he starts getting genuine bids from Porto again, from Bayer Leverkusen, who have been linked, from Stuttgart, who have been sniffing around, Europa League, Champions League, the money that will be on offer there, I don't see how he then doesn't become interested in that. And I just think it becomes really hard then for Borough to hold on to him, don't you?
What's he worth? Then you mentioned the Bellingham thing there.
Well, that's got to be a benchmark, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think
I guess the only difference for Bellingham is his surname's Bellingham.
Yeah.
And someone under a Premier League club. No.
Yeah, and Kwanzaa's going to, so Bellingham was around 30 million euros once, plus a few add-ons, to be fair. Kwanzaa, they're talking about what, 25 to buy a Leverkusen from Liverpool?
You've got to be looking 20 plus, haven't you?
I think Boro would have to be in the market of somewhere 25 to 30 million euros as a deal. Now, I'm not saying that'll all be up front. I'm sure it would be a deal with extensive add-ons factored in as part of it. The trade-off with that is that Boro would then, I'm pretty sure as well, insist on a sell-on clause to protect them further down the line. So there'll be a bit of horse trading there. But I think if, someone who, didn't start every game, but he's been a big part of the England under-21 setup for quite a while now. He's young, but he's got really extensive experience at championship level. Yes, he's not proven in the Premier League, but neither was Bellingham. So I think 25 to 30 million euros you have to be looking at. I don't think you'd want to let him go for much more than that, do you?
And Van den Berg's an interesting one because
he
hasn't had a great season. So
had
Van den Berg had a season this season, like his first season, when he cleaned up at the awards, I think there would have been the acceptance that, it's time for him to move on. He's been too good for the championship. He's ready to make the next step. We all know the background of who was interested in him, who wanted him when he signed for Boro, why he signed for Boro. I'm sure Van den Berg would say, well, he has said in an interview this summer, hasn't he, that the move to Boro has worked out exactly as he'd hoped, in that he's been playing regularly. What he didn't want to do was follow the route that his brother did, where he went to Liverpool young and basically just knocked around several loan moves, couldn't break in until the last year or so. So it comes down to clubs are still interested because they're aware of his potential. Do they? How strong is their interest? Are they going to make a move on that, or do they see how the first 6 months plays out, but then they run the risk of his price going up again? If you're Boro, do you try and keep hold of him? And if he's as good in his third season, or in the first half of his third season, as he was in his first season, then he's clearly going to be worth more. What's his stance on it? Is he going to push for a move? It feels like there's more variables in that one, doesn't there?
It does. It feels, what you haven't had with Van den Berg is the repeated windows where it's felt like a deal was maybe close. There's been interest in previous windows, don't get me wrong. But with Hackney, it just feels like it's been close, potentially, eventually it's going to happen. Van den Berg feels a little bit different like that. So I do feel like there's more chance probably of him being a Boro player at the start of next season than there probably is with Hackney. But that said, he's still going to be a very attractive option for clubs in a market that's red hot at the minute in terms of prices that players are going for. Another established under-21 international, obviously this time in Netherlands. He has played repeatedly for them during the tournament. Again, for his age, a good level of experience now. I mean, I don't... Van den Berg's probably not got quite the same value as Hackney, but I think if you're Boro, you're wanting 20 to 25 million euros for Van den Berg. I don't think you're letting him go for 10 million quid.
It's on potential, isn't it? It's on... Or a lot of it is. It's what he could be, what he's going to be. We've seen the signs.
Well, how far? I mean, I know he is behind because Kwanzaa's played Premier League football, but Kwanzaa was England's centre half at the England under-20, the European under-21s. Van den Berg's was the Netherlands'. Van den Berg's actually, I would hazard a guess, almost certainly actually made more senior appearances than Kwanzaa. All right, they've been in the Championship, but if Kwanzaa's going for 25 mil, Van den Berg can't be a kick up the backside off that.
And just finally then, before we wrap up, this last question from Nick: do you believe the coaching setup was the desire and design of Edwards, or was it put together by Kieran Scott? Well, you spoke to Edwards. There was a good piece on our site and in the paper over the weekend about the coaching setup, didn't you? And how it's been long in the making, pretty much long in the making.
Yes. I mean, the reality, the answer to that question is a little bit of both. But Edwards was pretty keen to say that he'd been speaking to Vivash from the spring. Not every day, but kind of having texts, having conversations. I think Edwards, once he'd left Luton, would clearly have been thinking, okay, well, where's my next move? Now, by that point, the people he'd worked with at Luton were in alternative jobs quite quickly. So he's then got the decision to make, okay, when I eventually get a job, do I make it a line in the sand that I want my people that I was working with before, and clubs are either going to have to like that or lump it? Or do I accept that actually, A, it's going to be much easier to put together a new look coaching team, but B, actually, it might benefit me because the team that he had at Luton, he made a point of saying was, a very specific team at a very specific time, at a very specific club, and everything just came together. You can't just assume that you lift all of that into a new club with a new set of players at a new time. It's just going to work again. So I think he wanted a different coaching setup than the one that he'd had. The Vivash thing was, I think, primarily probably Edwards driven. I think the club were key drivers in kind of putting Watling into the mix. And Edwards said he was someone that he knew. He'd had run-ins with, if you like, before, but he's not someone that he'd been speaking to the extent that he'd been speaking to Vivash until quite late in the day, and the team came together. So I think it's a bit of both. I think Edwards probably, wherever Rob Edwards had gone, I think Adi Vivash would have gone with him because I think that had been decided. I think Watling is more Boro saying, okay, so as a third body, have you thought about this guy? We like him. We think he's up and coming. We think he's got good ideas. And Edwards saying, yeah, I'm more than happy to go along with that. I know what you're talking about.
I think it was in the comments of our vid last week, Coventry fan who commented on Vivash. I think it was there where I'd seen it rather than social media. And it was something I've seen a fair bit of that. That's a real catch. That's a real catch getting Vivash. Hugely highly rated at Coventry, was seen as being instrumental really to their success over that period under Mark Robbins. All the noises on Vivash are extremely positive. That's not to say they're not on Watling as well. As you say, it had been mentioned to me a week or so before it was unveiled or before it was done that there was this really highly rated young coach who could be in the mix, who I assume, I haven't confirmed, but I assume that is Watling. He brings completely different experiences, doesn't he? But yeah, on Vivash, all the sounds are really positive. And from the outside looking in, he looks to be really the exact type of figure that there was a lot of calls for at the back end of last season when there was talk of this need for a more experienced head in there, just to freshen.
Yeah, it's easy to say in hindsight, but you do wonder if Vivash had been working alongside Carrick through the whole of the second half of last season, might things have been a little bit different. He seems a very strong character. I don't think he would have been afraid to tell Michael Carrick what he thought of what he was doing and what he thought he should be doing, which it did feel like Carrick needed, didn't it?
Well, we could go on, and I'm aware of the fact that there have been questions we haven't answered. But we'll do this quite frequently over the course of probably every other week. We'll do this. So keep your eye on our socials, and we'll always put a shout out a few hours or the day before. And then we'll try and get through as many as we can. So thanks to all of those who've got involved and asked us questions. Hope the answers have satisfied you at least slightly, and apologies to those who we didn't.
Apologies to those thinking, Christ almighty, that's nearly 40 minutes of my life.
40 minutes of my life, I'm not kidding. 40 minutes and they didn't even get to the question. We had a couple of random ones. White shorts or red shorts? What is it?
Yeah, for the kids.
White shorts or red shorts at home? I presume they meant the home kit and not just me, because I've got a pair of grey shorts on now.
Mine are like khaki style. Yeah, that I'm wearing in a minute. But Boro's home kit, white shorts, I think.
Boxers or briefs was the other question. We'll save that for next week.
Well, I need to think about that.
Well, thanks for watching.
That's Rob Edwards.
The question from our view. I don't know whether you're aware of You Are My Boro, Rob. We have a question. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks to those who've got involved. And we'll be back next week with our next episode of You Are My Boro. Take care.